And let's start with Fergus Hansen from the Lowy Institute. Fergus is working on this series that Lowy has introduced over this last 5 or 6 years, which I think has made extremely interesting reading. Australian perceptions of Indonesia, but also of a number of other countries. Fergus comes to us with a background from study in a number of universities, from a period in DFAT, and now, of course, as a research fellow at the Lowy Institute. So, Fergus, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me along today. I'm an optimist by nature, so I was reluctant to give this presentation on Australia-Indonesia relations, and which involves me being so negative for a short period. Because it is no secret that Australia's perceptions of Indonesians and Indonesians' perceptions of Australians are not good. I can't do any better than the Indonesian president, who put it this way in his address to the Australian Parliament last year, and this is a quote. "The most persistent problem in our relations is the persistence of age-old stereotypes, misleading, simplistic, mental caricature that depicts the other side in a bad light. Even in the age of cable television and the internet, there are Australians who still see Indonesia as an authoritarian country, as a military dictatorship, as a hotbed of Islamic extremism, or even as an expansionist power. On the other hand, in Indonesia, there are people who remain afflicted with Australiaphobia. Those who believe that the notion of white Australia still persists, that Australia harbours ill intention towards Indonesia, and is either sympathetic to or supports separatist elements in our country. We must expunge this preposterous mental caricature if we are to achieve a more resilient partnership." It's a damning assessment of the current state of mutual perceptions, and from a look at the available polling data, it would seem a pretty accurate one. At the Lowy Institute, we've been asking Australians to rate their feelings towards Indonesia on a 0 to 100 scale since 2006. This slide comes from our 2009 poll, and you'll see Indonesia there on a very lukewarm 49 degrees. Until last year, Indonesia had never ranked above 50 on this scale, and what happened last year I'll get to in a moment. The poll we took in Indonesia in 2006 revealed that Indonesians have very similar views to Australians' perceptions of Indonesia. You'll see Australia rating just 51 degrees there. The polls also present other evidence of this deep mistrust. This chart from our 2009 poll, and shows that here in Australia, a majority of Australians, 54%, don't trust Indonesia very much, or not at all, to act responsibly in the world. This result from our 2010 poll, and I'm talking about the chart on the right-hand side, asked Australians if they thought Indonesia was more of a threat or less of a threat now than it was 15 years ago, or if there'd been no change. Well, as you will see, a third of Australians thought it had become more of a threat, and around 40% thought there had been no change. And it is not like Indonesians see Australia any more positively. These results from our 2006 poll in Indonesia show that Indonesians think Australia has a tendency to interfere in Indonesia's internal affairs, and are pretty much ambivalent as to whether or not Australia has really shown itself to be a long-term reliable friend. Incidentally, if anyone would be interested in this audience in funding a follow-up poll, please let me know at the end of the session. So what's driving what President SBY calls these preposterous mental caricatures? For me, these negative views are being entrenched at almost every level. At a government level, working relations between ministers and officials might be very close, strong and frequent, but the areas the discussions are focused on are almost exclusively negative. The best evidence of this comes from the DFAT website itself, where in its opening description of the relationship it states, and this is a quote, Australia and Indonesia cooperate in practical ways on a wide range of international issues, including counter-terrorism, illegal fishing, people smuggling, avian influenza, climate change and interfaith dialogue. The message the government is sending loud and clear is that Indonesia is one big threat to Australia. Terrorists, Indonesia's got plenty of them, but we're working on it. Illegal fishing, illegal logging, illegal immigration, yep, Indonesia's a huge source country, but we're working on stopping it. You get the picture. When this sort of language is coming from the diplomatic service, let alone the tabloids, you know you have a major problem with perceptions. It's simply extraordinary, when you think about it, that the government would write about Australia's most important relationship in this way. And I'm going to engage you now in a bit of a thought experiment. Imagine if the government tried this sort of messaging with other critical relationships. I think there'd be outrage. Take this hypothetical example of description of the US relationship. Australia and the United States cooperate in practical ways on a wide range of international issues, including prevention of illegal US overstayers in Australia, eradicating US agricultural subsidies, preventing US arms shipments to countries of concern, and protecting sensitive diplomatic correspondence from being leaked. It just wouldn't happen. If the messages are bad, though, at a government level, they are possibly even worse at a mass level. I did a very quick, unscientific review of using Factiva of reports in major Australian national and state newspapers over 2010, covering Indonesia. And the top subject area for all reports relating to Indonesia was crime and courts. Second was political and general news, followed by asylum and immigration reports. Hardly an example of a well-balanced relationship. And I don't need to tell people here that at a business level, the relationship is also seriously underdone. Australia does about twice as much trade with New Zealand, which has less than 2% of Indonesia's population and around 1/5 of its GDP. And Indonesia accounts for a very meagre 0.4% of Australia's total stock of overseas investment, while Indonesia's investment in Australia is around 600 million. At every level, then, there's a lot of room for improvement. So what can be done? I think with stereotypes this entrenched and this negative, the gradual measures will have only minimal impact on perceptions at a government, business and people-to-people level. What I think is needed are big dramatic gestures from the leadership on both sides to try and jolt people and force them into a reappraisal of the relationship. The commencement of negotiations on a comprehensive economic partnership agreement are certainly a step in the right direction, but a lot more will be needed. To finish on a positive note, I thought I'd show you what can happen when there is more of a constructive narrative about Indonesia being discussed here in Australia. This chart comes from our 2010 poll, which was taken during and immediately after the President's March visit. It has Indonesia rated at a still modest 54 degrees, but it's the first time in the history of our polling that Indonesia has ever rated above 50. Thank you.